So now we're in the editing portion of Capture One. You saw how I organized all the images in my file structure. You saw how I sent the proofs, how I get the favorites list back from the client. So now it's time to start editing the photos that the client wants. So at this part, we're gonna go over to the computer. We're gonna go to the adjust tab, as you can see here. We're gonna select the image. For the sake of this, I'm gonna use this image. So starting off, I just feel like the image is a little too warm for my liking. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna adjust the white balance, bring in just a little bit of cool. And as you can see, this is the before, this is after the adjustment, before and after, just to kind of take a little bit of that orange tint away from it. Another thing that I typically do is, let me go over here to the styles tab. I typically adjust my my curve. So I typically do linear response. That's just a personal preference. It makes the highlights much softer, as you can see. As far as like from the highlights on the forehead, nose, lips, they're just much softer. So I typically do linear response here for my curve, and then I'll go back to adjust. I'll bring my exposure up to brighten the image back up a little bit. I typically go at least a stop, or come up at least almost a stop in exposure after I change my curve to linear. Then from there, let's see, we'll drop the highlights a little bit. I'm adding a little saturation. And then the main thing I mess with are my levels. So we're gonna kind of darken some of the blacks, and I'm gonna bring down some of the mid-tones a little bit, just to add a little contrast. So as you can see, this is the before, this is the after, the before, and the after. So after that, I might do a little to my curves adjustment. Whenever I am adjusting the curves, I only make sure I'm adjusting the Luma and not the full RGB. Because if you do adjust the full RGB, it is also changing your red, green, and blue channels. And I only want to change my exposure channels. So we'll do a little bit to the curves here. So as you can see, you can play around with it to see what each thing does. But pretty much the bottom of this curve is the shadows, and the top are your highlights. And then you can create these anchor points by just simply clicking on the line. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna bring my midtones up a little bit, as well as my black point. I'm gonna bring my black point up a little. So if you can see, like by her ear, under her hair, on the right side, you can kind of see that it's doing a little adjusting in there. That's what that particular slider was doing. And then, so yeah, something like that. And I'm gonna bring my shadows down just a little bit, and my black point. So we go from that to that. It's not like a huge difference, but it definitely is a difference. I typically try to keep my images as natural as possible. I don't do too much manipulations to the colors or to people and their bodies. Yeah, I just try to keep everything as natural as possible. Another thing that I don't do is I don't really add like too much. I don't really manipulate the colors much. This was a shoot for a brand, so I did want to keep the colors as real life as possible and not mess around with too much with the colors. But if you are doing different creative stuff, you definitely can play around with these colors and see what each one does. As you can see, this is the highlight, this is shadow, and then this is the midtone. So you can go through and mess with those to your liking. For the sake of this particular photo, I am not going to mess with it much though. So yeah, we'll have something like that right there. I like this. This is more of my style of edit. But you can definitely do more or less as much as you want. But this is just kind of how I do it. Another thing I do is I would typically, I'm gonna bring that brightness back down. So another thing I would do is I would typically draw like this oval. So I would draw this oval and kind of shape it around my subject. I will bring this in to kind of feather. And then, so what this is doing is it's creating a mask. So as you can see, I can adjust things, but it's not affecting anything that's inside of this this circle here. It's only affecting the areas that's in red. So one thing I typically do is I drop my exposure down a little bit to the outside. So now you can see I have, oh my bad. It has created a new layer over here. As you can see, this is my back, start off as a background. Now I got this adjustment layer, and you can see kind of how it brings focus to the face of the subject by having the face brighter than the rest of the image. So that's without it, that's with it. It's super subtle. You can definitely not do it if you don't want to, but it's definitely something I do on a lot of my images, even my outdoor images. And people think I use flash when I don't, just because of the way the light is seeming to be hitting the subject. So I'll leave that somewhere like that. That's without it. And that is with it. So at this point, I would typically just batch edit a lot of these photos. So I would go up here to the copy, then I would come here, and then I would hit apply, and it pretty much just copy those settings over to this image. One thing to be mindful of is your if you did do this adjustment layer, it might change a little bit. So you might have to reposition your adjustment layer, but that's the before and that's the after. So that's typically what I do. Like, that's how I go through and do a session. You typically want all your images to look or feel the same. So I don't go through and edit each image one by one, because you may do something different on one than you did on the other one. And whenever you are viewing it from like, dang, my bad, wrong one. Whenever you are viewing it from like a gallery like this, and you got one image that look one way and the image that's beside it look another way, it just don't look pleasing whenever you're in a gallery setting and all of your images look different. So for that purpose is the reason why I typically just copy and paste my edits. Once I edit one image that I really like, I just copy and paste those settings so that all the other images will look similar to that image, making everything look more consistent. That is what that is for. And boom. So yeah, so that's before and that's after. So like I said, it's super subtle. Like I said, I don't do too much to my images, and I try to get it the way I want it in camera, to where whenever I am in editing, I don't have to do a ton of work to my images. So that's pretty much how I would go through and edit these photos. I would just constantly keep doing that. So now I'm about to switch over to another image that is not in studio, like an outdoor image, just to show you my approach to editing like an outdoor image. Everything will stay the same for the outdoor shoots, except for I might probably edit them a little differently. But as far as the importing, the sending proofs, all that stuff is still going to stay the same. So let's get ready and go over to an outdoor image. All right, so I'm back with another image. This image is outside, and we're about to see how I would process this raw image. So we're gonna go over here to the adjust tab. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change my curve from auto to linear. We'll rock with the linear curve. From there, I'm gonna bring my exposure back up. All right, cool. I'm gonna add a little contrast and saturation. And then I'm gonna drop the highlights a little bit. And now I'm gonna adjust my levels, bring my blacks up. Something like that. Bring my black point down. Shadows down a little bit. There we go, so something like that. Add a little bit more saturation back in there. Then for this, what I'm gonna do, so I am gonna adjust these greens in the back. So I'm gonna go over here to my green slider, and as you can see, if I adjust this, as you can see, the green in the back is adjusting. So I want this to go to like a warmer color. Cut the saturation of that green up a little bit and make it a little bit darker. So I'm gonna do that for those greens. So whenever you are editing, you definitely do want to be careful when you are adjusting the orange and the reds, because that is where skin tones typically lay at. So if you do adjust those, you will, or you can be adjusting their skin tone, which if that's something you're going for, then that's definitely something you want to do. But in most cases, I just typically leave my skin tones alone. I shoot with Canon. They typically have pretty good color science, so the skin tones typically look good anyway. But yeah, that's just a side note though. I'm gonna add a little bit more contrast to this image. And don't try to get this too perfect, because I am gonna show you what I do in Photoshop as well. If you weren't taking this image into Photoshop, then you probably would do a little bit more here with adjusting your contrast. But since I am gonna do a dodge and burn technique, I don't really have to do that here. So I'm gonna just get it to a good starting point though for whenever I do get into Photoshop. And this is a before, this is the after. Like I said, super subtle, but it does make a difference. So that's a before, and that's the after. So I'm gonna bring my exposure up a little bit more and bring my midtones down. Somewhere like that. Cool. All right, so I don't know if I've said it yet, but so your highlight slider, adjust your highlights, shadow, adjust your shadows, whites, adjust the whites in the image, and the blacks, adjust the blacks. So if you don't know what a slider do, a quick way to find out is get the slider, drag it all the way to one side, and you'll quickly find out what it does. So yeah, that's what that is. I'm gonna also do a little bit to my curves here. Make a little curve adjustment. Like again, I'm only adjusting the luma. I'm not gonna adjust the RGB channels. So yeah, I'm only do the luma. Get it somewhere like that. Then we got a before image and a after image. So for this image, I'm not dealing with the brand or anything. And I'm gonna add some orange into the highlights. So as you can see, if you move this around, you can see what colors to do. So I wanna kind of warm this up a little bit. This was taken in like February or something, so it was a little cool outside. So I wanna make it feel a little bit warmer. So I'm gonna add a little orange into the highlights, and I'm gonna tone it back a little bit. So somewhere around there. So we got a before and a after. And I like the way that looks. And I'm gonna add my radial mask around it real quick, because this is the outdoor image. So I'm gonna go ahead and add my little radial mask to this. So we'll be somewhere like that. And then go up here, I'm gonna drop the exposure to the background Not that much, but something like that. Let's see what we're looking like. Press M, we'll feather it a little bit more. Boom. All right, cool. So they just make her pop out a little bit from the background. So we go from there to there, and now we got a before and a after. I like that much better. I forgot to add that. So yeah, that is something I typically do. But that's how I would get this image to where it's at though. I use that radial filter a lot. It's better than just doing the vignette that only darkens the corners. The radial tool just allow you to darken specific areas of an image or leave certain areas bright. So that's what that do. Now I'm gonna go to this image at the Moxie. So the first thing that stands out to me about this image is it is super warm, like the white balance was just a little bit off. So I'm gonna go to my white balance and I'm gonna cool it off a little bit. All right, so that's much better. Before, after, making white balance adjustments can make a big difference to say the least. So once again, I'm gonna go over here, I'm gonna change my curve to linear. That's just a personal preference, that's what I like. You cannot do that in Lightroom though, so keep that in mind. So as you can see, like if you look at the highlights on this background area, this light here, once I add the linear, it just, I don't know, it's just much softer and I prefer it. So that's why I do it. I'm gonna add a little contrast and a little saturation for now. Next thing I do, I go to my levels, bring up my shadows, I'm gonna leave the midtones kind of where they at and just mess with these shadows. Mess with my shadows, bring my black point down a little bit, but I'm gonna bring up that tad. And then you got a before and an after, which to me is already looking much better. I'm gonna go ahead and add my my radial tool on this as well. So for this, I did use a flash. I just used like a cheap Godox speed light though. I didn't use like anything expensive, and I was just holding it like off to the side in my hand. I didn't have a softbox or nothing. So, but the image came out pretty straight though. So for there, I'm gonna just, since the background on this image is already a little dark, I'm not gonna darken this one as much. So I'm gonna go back to this background layer and bring my blacks back up. And then I'll go back here to this adjustment layer and bring the background down a little bit. And there we go. Got a before image and after. So like I said, something just super subtle. Like I still have to edit this image in Photoshop, so I'm not trying to do too much here. This is just where I start like my basic edits at. So I still got editing to do in Photoshop, so don't think that this is like the final image, but when I first started out, this would be the final image though. I didn't know nothing about editing in Photoshop, so this would kind of be what the clients would get. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna export these images. So I'm gonna select these two images. I'm gonna go ahead and hit export for this. I'm not gonna be on masterclass anymore. We're gonna go to full size JPEG at the highest quality. It's gonna go to the sessions folder, to the sessions output folder, and I'm gonna name this retouch. So we got retouch here, that's gonna be the subfolder, and then I'm gonna just go ahead and hit export for these two images. So that's gonna export those, and then I'm gonna go back to this first set of images and export. I'm gonna just export this one. So yeah, we're just gonna export this one from here. And then if you want to create a recipe for this, you can, but I'm just using the default Capture One recipe that's for the JPEG, and this JPEG is going in the same subfolder that the last ones went in. So we're going to hit export. It's going to export that one image. And now if we go to our sessions folder and go to output, we got this retouch folder, and it got our 3 images in there. And now that is what I would do for the basic editing. Now we're about to get ready and take these images and go into Photoshop with them. I could have sent them directly from Capture One to edit them in Photoshop, but I typically like to have a reference image, so I always just export them as the JPEGs, and then I just close Capture One. Now I'm about to open up Photoshop and import those JPEGs into Photoshop.